Mom read her will out loud at dinner. $400,000 to my brother for a house. To me, her blessing and prayers. I smiled and said thank you. Then I canceled every auto pay I'd set up for her. She found out on the 1st. My name's Craig. I'm 34. And if you told me a year ago that I'd be sitting here telling strangers on the internet about the night my mother essentially told me I was worth less than a down payment, I'd have laughed and gone back to paying her electric bill. Which, by the way, is kind of the whole point of this story. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me set the stage for you. I grew up in a mid-sized town outside of Richmond, Virginia. Nice enough place. Lots of oak trees, a couple decent diners, the kind of neighborhood where people wave at you from their porches even if they don't remember your name. My mom, Jolene, raised me and my older brother Garrett in a 3-bedroom ranch house that my dad left her when he passed from a heart attack when I was 11. Dad was a quiet guy, worked for the power company, came home smelling like copper wire and Old Spice. He wasn't flashy, but he was steady. He kept the lights on, literally and figuratively. When he died, the steadiness went with him. Mom did her best. I'll give her that. She picked up shifts at the hospital where she worked as an intake coordinator, and she kept us fed and clothed. But somewhere along the way, a pattern started that I didn't fully understand until I was well into adulthood. Garrett was the golden child. And I don't mean that in the casual way people throw that term around. I mean he could set the kitchen on fire making ramen, and Mom would praise him for showing initiative. Garrett is 2 years older than me. He's got this effortless charisma, the kind of guy who walks into a room and people just gravitate toward him. Good looking, funny, always knew exactly what to say. Me? I was the quiet one. I got decent grades, didn't cause trouble, helped around the house without being asked. I was basically furniture that occasionally mowed the lawn. Now here's the thing. I'm not sitting here pretending I was some misunderstood genius. I was an average kid who turned into a pretty average adult for a while. But average doesn't mean invisible. At least, it shouldn't. The problem was, in my family, if you weren't Garrett, you were background noise. Garrett played football in high school. Mom went to every single game. She wore his jersey number on a homemade t-shirt. I ran cross country. Mom came to one meet, showed up late, and spent the whole time on her phone talking to her sister about Garrett's chances of getting a scholarship. He didn't get the scholarship, by the way, but that didn't slow down the Garrett hype train. After high school, I went to community college, got a 2-year degree in information technology, and started working at a small managed services company doing IT support. Nothing glamorous, but I was good at it. I liked solving problems, liked the logic of networks and systems. Over the years, I worked my way up, got some certifications, and eventually landed a solid position as a systems administrator for a regional healthcare company. I was making decent money. Not rich, but comfortable. I had a little apartment, a 10-year-old truck that ran fine, and a savings account that I was quietly proud of. Garrett, on the other hand, bounced around. He tried real estate for a while, then got into selling cars, then had a brief stint doing something with cryptocurrency that he could never quite explain. He made money in bursts and spent it faster. But to hear Mom tell it, Garrett was an entrepreneur, a visionary. I was just Craig, the one who's good with computers. Here's where the financial piece comes in, because that's really what this story is about. When Mom turned 60, her health started to decline. Nothing catastrophic at first, just the usual stuff. Bad knees, high blood pressure, a bout of pneumonia that scared all of us. She retired from the hospital, and her pension plus Social Security covered the basics, but not much else. Her house needed a new roof. Her car was dying. Her prescriptions weren't cheap. So I stepped up. I didn't make a big speech about it. I just started handling things. I set up auto pay for her electric bill, her water bill, her internet. I covered her car insurance. When the roof needed replacing, I put $12,000 on a payment plan and chipped away at it. When her car finally gave up, I co-signed on a used Camry and made the first 8 months of payments until she could pick it up herself. I sent her $300 a month on top of all that, just so she'd have a cushion. Garrett? Garrett sent vibes. He'd call Mom once a week, tell her she was the greatest mother in the world, and then conveniently forget to mention that he hadn't contributed a dime to anything. He did take her to lunch once in a while, though, at Applebee's. So there's that. I didn't resent it. Not really. Not at first. I told myself I was doing it because it was the right thing to do, because Dad would have wanted me to, because that's what family does. And honestly, I believe that. I'm not wired to keep score. Or at least I wasn't. The thing that started to chip away at me was the way Mom talked about it. Or rather, the way she didn't. She never once said thank you. Not genuinely. She'd acknowledge it the way you acknowledge someone holding a door open for you. A quick nod, maybe a distracted, "Oh, that's nice, Craig." Meanwhile, Garrett would send her a text saying, "Thinking of you, Mom," and she'd call me to tell me how sweet and thoughtful he was. I am not exaggerating. That actually happened multiple times. My girlfriend at the time, Sloan, was the first person to really call it out. She's a middle school counselor, very direct, does not sugarcoat things. She sat me down one night after I'd gotten off the phone with Mom and said, "Craig, do you realize your mother just spent 20 minutes telling you how Garrett surprised her with a phone call on her birthday and didn't mention that you literally drove 2 hours to fix her garbage disposal last Saturday?" I opened my mouth to defend Mom, and nothing came out. Because Sloan was right. She was always right about that stuff. It's annoying and also one of the reasons I love her. But I kept paying, kept showing up, kept being the invisible safety net. Because I kept telling myself that Mom loved me the same, she just showed it differently. That's what I told myself, anyway, right up until the dinner. Mom called me on a Tuesday and said she wanted the whole family over for dinner that Saturday. She said she had something important to discuss. I figured it was a health thing, maybe a financial thing. Sloan and I drove down, brought a pie because that's what you do. Garrett showed up 45 minutes late with his girlfriend Presley, who I'd met exactly twice, and who looked at our mom's house like she was visiting a museum exhibit on poverty. Mom had made pot roast, which was her signature move for big occasions. She was in a weirdly good mood, almost giddy. After dinner, she cleared her throat and said she'd been to see her lawyer. She said she wanted to be transparent about her will, so there wouldn't be any surprises later. I thought, okay, that's actually mature and reasonable. Good for her. Then she started reading. Mom pulled out this manila folder like she was about to present quarterly earnings. She had her reading glasses on, the ones with the little chain. She opened the folder, straightened the papers, and looked at both of us with an expression that she probably thought was warm, but honestly just looked rehearsed. "I've thought about this a lot," she said, "and I want you boys to know that I love you both equally. But I also have to be practical. I should have known right then. Whenever someone starts a sentence with, 'I love you both equally,' what follows is never equal. It's like when someone says, 'No offense, but,' you're about to be offended." She started with Garrett. The house, she said, was going to Garrett. The 3-bedroom ranch where we grew up, where Dad had built the back deck with his own hands, where I'd spent weekends fixing the plumbing and replacing outlets. That house. But that wasn't all. She'd also been putting money away. I didn't even know she had money to put away, given that I was subsidizing half her existence. But apparently she'd been saving and investing a small inheritance from her own mother, who passed about 5 years back. She never told me about that, by the way. Never mentioned it once in all those conversations about how tight things were. The total she'd set aside for Garrett? For $100,000. Earmarked specifically so he could buy a house. She said, and I quote, "Garrett, you've always had big dreams, and I want to make sure you have a foundation to build on." $400,000 in a house. For the man who had contributed exactly $0 to her care. For the man whose biggest act of filial devotion was a weekly phone call and an occasional plate of riblets at Applebee's. I sat there, and I could feel Sloane's hand tighten on my knee under the table. Not a comforting squeeze. More of a brace-yourself squeeze. She knew what was coming. Honestly, I think I knew too. But part of me, that stupid optimistic part that kept paying bills and fixing garbage disposals, still thought maybe Mom had something meaningful set aside for me too. Mom turned to me. She smiled. And she said, "Craig, sweetheart, you've always been so independent. So capable. You don't need money the way Garrett does. So what I want to give you is something more valuable than money. I'm giving you my blessing and my prayers. I know that might not seem like much now, but one day you'll understand that a mother's love is the greatest inheritance." The room went quiet. Not the peaceful kind of quiet. The kind of quiet that happens right before someone flips a table. Presley was looking at her phone. Garrett had this expression that was half guilty, half triumphant, like a kid who knows the teacher gave him a better grade than he deserved but isn't about to correct it. I looked at my mother. I looked at this woman I had been financially supporting for nearly 4 years. The woman whose roof I'd replaced, whose car I'd co-signed, whose pills I'd paid for, whose electric bill had my bank account number attached to it. and she was giving me blessings and prayers. You know that feeling when something is so absurd that your brain can't process it as real? Like you're watching a movie and you think, nobody would actually do this? That's where I was. I was sitting at my mother's dinner table, full of her pot roast, and I was having an out-of-body experience. Sloane's grip on my knee was now roughly the pressure of a hydraulic press. I could practically hear her thoughts. They were loud, and they were not charitable. But here's the thing about me. I don't explode. I never have. Even when I should. Even when the situation absolutely calls for a good old-fashioned eruption, I go quiet. I process. I calculate. Some people might call that being passive. Sloane calls it terrifying, because she says the quieter I get, the more surgical the response ends up being. So I smiled. I looked my mother in the eye, and I said, "Thank you, Mom. That means a lot." Garrett visibly relaxed. Mom beamed. Presley kept looking at her phone, and Sloane looked at me like I'd just activated a countdown timer, and she wasn't sure if she should run or get popcorn. We finished dinner. I helped clear the table, wash the dishes by hand because Mom's dishwasher had been broken for 3 months, and guess who she'd called to come look at it? We said our goodbyes. Mom hugged Garrett like he was shipping off to war. She patted me on the shoulder and said, "Drive safe, honey." We got in the car. Sloane didn't say a word for the first 10 minutes. She just sat there, vibrating with restrained commentary. Finally, she turned to me and said, "Craig, yeah, blessings and prayers. Yep, $400,000 for Garrett. Blessings and prayers for you. That is what happened, yes. And you said thank you." I did. She stared at me for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" I kept my eyes on the road. "I'm going to stop paying for everything." Sloane leaned back in her seat. "Okay, not dramatically, not with a speech. I'm just going to stop. When? Tonight." And that's exactly what I did. When we got home, I sat down at my laptop, opened my banking app, and started canceling. The electric bill, the water bill, the internet, the car insurance, the $300 monthly transfer. All of it. Every single auto pay that had my mother's name or address attached to it. I didn't send a text. I didn't call. I just quietly removed myself from the equation. It took about 15 minutes. For years of financial support, erased in 15 minutes. I won't pretend there wasn't a pang of guilt. There was. But it was competing with something stronger, something I'd been burying for years. It was the realization that I wasn't being a good son. I was being used. There's a difference, and I'd been too close to see it. Sloane sat next to me the whole time. She didn't cheer. She didn't gloat. She just put her hand on my back and said, "You okay?" I said, "I think so." Asked me again on the first. The first. That's when the bills would come due. That's when the direct debits would bounce. That's when my mother would notice that her safety net had quietly packed up and left. The next few weeks were strange. I felt lighter, which I hadn't expected. I also felt guilty, which I had expected. Sloane was great about it. She didn't push me to talk about it, but she also didn't let me spiral. She'd catch me staring at my phone, waiting for Mom to call, and she'd just raise an eyebrow and say, "Not yet." Garrett called me once during that stretch, which was unusual. He wanted to know if I'd heard about some new investment opportunity. I told him I was busy and hung up. He didn't call back. Mom called me the following week to tell me about something she saw on television. A normal, chatty call. She didn't mention the will. She didn't ask how I was feeling about it. She talked for 20 minutes about a cooking show and then said she had to go because Garrett was calling on the other line. I said goodbye and felt nothing. And then the first of the month arrived. I was at work when my phone started buzzing. First it was a text from Mom, then another, then a call, then another call. I let them all go to voicemail. When I checked during my lunch break, I had 4 missed calls and a string of texts that escalated from confused to panicked. "Craig, my electric bill is saying past due. Did something happen with the bank? Craig, call me back please. Craig, my car insurance got canceled. What is going on? Craig, call me." I read them all. I took a bite of my sandwich. And I texted back one line. "Hey Mom, sorry, been busy at work. What's going on?" She called immediately. I let it ring 3 times, then picked up. She was frantic. Her electric company was threatening a shut-off notice. Her car insurance had lapsed. Her internet was down. She didn't understand what happened. She kept saying, "Something's wrong with the bank. Craig, something's wrong." And I said, very calmly, "Mom, I canceled the auto pays." Silence. Dead silence. The kind of silence that has weight to it. "You what?" I canceled them. All of them. The electric, the water, the insurance, the monthly transfer. I canceled everything. Why would you do that? And here it was. The moment. I took a breath and said, because you told me that what I deserve is your blessing and your prayers. So I figured you didn't need my money anymore. You've got something more valuable, remember? The silence on the other end of that phone call lasted about 8 seconds, which doesn't sound like much until you're living through it. 8 seconds of my mother recalculating her entire reality. Then she did what she always does when she's cornered. She cried, "Craig, how could you do this to me? I'm your mother. I'm 64 years old, and you're going to let my lights get shut off. And look, I'm not made of stone." Hearing your mother cry will always hit different, no matter how justified you are. But I'd spent 4 years being the invisible wallet, and I'd spent the car ride home from that dinner doing math in my head. Do you know how much money I'd given my mother over those 4 years? I sat down and calculated it the night I canceled everything. Between the monthly transfers, the bills, the roof, the car payments, and random emergencies, I'd spent just north of $68,000. $68,000, and I got blessings and prayers. "Mom," I said, "I love you, but I can't keep doing this. You have $400,000 set aside. You have a house that's paid off. You'll be fine. That money is for Garrett. That's his future. And apparently my future is prayers. So let's both lean into our inheritances and see how it goes." She hung up on me, which was fine. I expected it. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Not from Mom, though. She went silent on me, which was her version of punishment. The calls came from Garrett, Aunt Della, my mom's sister, my cousin Tatum, who I hadn't spoken to in probably 2 years. Even Presley texted me, which was bold for someone I'd had maybe 6 total conversations with. The narrative was already set. Craig was being cruel. Craig was abandoning his mother. Craig was punishing a sweet old woman for making a reasonable estate decision. Nobody, and I mean nobody, mentioned the 4 years of financial support. Nobody acknowledged the $68,000. Nobody asked for my side. Garrett's call was something special. He called me on a Wednesday evening, and he opened with, "Bro, what are you doing? Mom's a mess. She'll figure it out. She's got resources. Come on, man. You know that money isn't liquid. It's invested. She can't just pull it out. Then maybe she should ask her financial advisor for some blessings and prayers." He didn't think that was funny. "Craig, you're being petty. This isn't about money." "You're right, Garrett. It's not about money. It's about the fact that I've been carrying this family financially for 4 years, and Mom told me to my face that what I deserve is a pat on the head. So if it's not about money, then me stopping shouldn't be a problem." He stammered something about how Mom loves us both, how the will was just practical because I'm more stable, how I shouldn't take it personally. The same deflections, the same excuses. I told him I had to go and hung up. That was the beginning of what I call the dark month. Not because anything terrible happened, but because everything felt heavy. I second-guessed myself constantly. Was I being petty? Was I punishing my mother for a decision she had every legal right to make? Was I the villain in this story? Sloan was my anchor during all of it. She didn't tell me I was right. She didn't tell me I was wrong. She asked me questions. Good ones. "Craig, if your mom had split things equally and you found out later, would you have kept paying her bills?" "Yes," without hesitation. "And if she'd split things unevenly but had acknowledged everything you've done, thank you, even just once with real sincerity, would that have changed things?" I had to think about that one. And the answer was probably yes, too. It wasn't about the money. It was about being seen, about being valued, about being something more than the reliable one who gets taken for granted because he never complains. Sloan also pointed out something I hadn't considered. You know your mom's been getting your money and Garrett's attention, right? She's been double dipping. She gets the emotional validation from him and the financial security from you. And she doesn't have to give either of you what the other one provides because you each fill a different role. You're not her son, Craig. You're her utility. That one hit me like a freight train. Because it was true. I was the utility. The dependable background appliance that keeps the house running. Nobody thanks the water heater until it breaks. I threw myself into work during that stretch. My company was going through a big infrastructure migration, and I volunteered for every extra project I could find. My boss, a guy named Harlan who looked like he'd been born in a server room, noticed the uptick and pulled me aside. He asked if everything was okay. I gave him the short version. He nodded and said, Family stuff is the worst because you can't reboot the system and start fresh. Then he told me there was a senior architect position opening up in the next quarter and that I should apply. I told him I would. I also started doing something I'd never really done before. I started spending money on myself. Not recklessly, but intentionally. I took Sloan to a nice restaurant, not Applebee's. I bought a new set of tools for the woodworking hobby I'd been neglecting. I signed up for a certification course that I'd been putting off because the $1,200 fee had always felt indulgent when mom's bills were on my plate. It's amazing how much breathing room you have when you're not financing someone else's life. About 6 weeks after the dinner, something unexpected happened. Sloan and I had been dating for about 2 years at that point, and one night she sat me down and said, "I want to talk about us." Which is a sentence that can go either direction, so my heart rate spiked accordingly. She told me that watching me go through this, watching me stand up for myself and deal with the fallout without crumbling, had made her realize something. She said, "I always knew you were steady, but now I know you're strong. Those aren't the same thing." Then she said she wanted to move in together, not as a trial run, but as a step toward building something permanent. I said yes before she finished the sentence. We found a place within a month. A 2-bedroom townhouse with a little backyard and a garage I immediately earmarked for a workshop. It was ours. Not mine, not hers. Ours. First time in my life something felt like it was built on equal ground. Meanwhile, the family situation was evolving. Mom still wasn't talking to me. Garrett had taken to sending me passive-aggressive texts every few days. Things like, "Hope you're sleeping well," and "Mom's struggling, but I'm sure you're too busy." I didn't respond. Not because I was trying to be cold, but because I'd learned something important. You can't reason with people who've already decided you're the problem. The only thing you can do is keep living. Aunt Della called me one Sunday morning. She was the one family member who I thought might actually listen, because she'd always been decent to me growing up. She started with, "Craig, honey, I just want to understand what happened." So I told her. Everything. The bills, the roof, the car, the monthly transfers, the total amount, the will reading, the blessings and prayers. All of it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Jolene never told us you were paying for all that." I know. She told us Garrett was helping with the bills. I let that sit. I didn't even need to say anything. Della connected the dots herself. "Oh, honey," she said. And there was something in her voice that I hadn't heard from a family member in a long time. It sounded like someone actually seeing me. Della didn't take sides publicly, but I could tell something shifted. She started calling me more often, just to check in. She was just present, and that meant more to me than any amount of money. The senior architect position Harlan had mentioned was posted internally, and I submitted my application. 3 rounds of interviews, and Sloan quizzed me on technical scenarios every night for 2 weeks. When the offer came through, it was a 40% raise and a title that actually reflected what I'd been doing for years. I called Sloan's parents, who had basically adopted me at that point. Her dad, a retired electrician named Boyd, shook my hand so hard I thought he'd dislocate my shoulder. Her mom, Rosalind, made a cake, an actual celebration cake. For me, I almost lost it at that kitchen table because I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had celebrated something I'd done. 3 months after the dinner. New job, new home, new sense of who I was. The old Craig, the utility, the invisible safety net, was fading, and I was starting to like who was replacing him. For months after the dinner, Garrett called me. Not a passive-aggressive text, an actual phone call, and he sounded different. Smaller, somehow, like the air had been let out of him. "Craig, we need to talk. For real this time." I almost didn't pick up. Sloan was sitting across from me at our kitchen table grading papers, and she looked up when she saw the caller ID. She raised an eyebrow, which in Sloan language means, "Your call, but I'm here." I answered. Garrett told me that things had gotten complicated. Turns out that once I stopped paying Mom's bills, reality showed up with an invoice. Mom had burned through more of her own monthly income than I'd realized, mostly because she'd been spending freely, knowing my auto-pays covered the essentials. Without my subsidies, she was short every month. Significantly short. So she'd gone to Garrett, and she'd asked him for money. Now, you have to understand something about Garrett. Garrett has never in his life been asked to financially support anyone. He's the one who gets supported. It's his whole identity. So when Mom came to him, hat in hand, asking for help with the electric bill and the car insurance and the water bill and everything else I'd been covering, Garrett did what Garrett always does. He promised the world and delivered a postcard. He gave her $500 the first month and told her he'd figure out the rest. The second month, he sent $300. The third month, he sent nothing because he'd gotten into some new business venture that required startup capital. By month 4, Mom was behind on nearly everything, and Garrett was dodging her calls the same way he used to dodge mine. "She's losing it, Craig," Garrett said. "She called me 7 times yesterday. She's talking about selling the house. The house she's leaving you in the will? Come on, man. I'm serious, Garrett. She's leaving you the house and 400 grand. Why does she need my help? Because the 400,000 is invested. It's in retirement accounts and some index fund thing her advisor set up. She can't just pull it out without penalties and taxes. It's long-term money. Sounds like a her problem. And a you problem, not a me problem." Garrett got quiet. Then he said something that genuinely surprised me. "You're right. I know you're right. I just don't know what to do." I didn't give him an answer. I told him I needed to think and hung up. But that conversation planted a seed. Not a seed of guilt. A seed of strategy. See, I didn't want revenge in the dramatic Hollywood sense. I didn't want to destroy my mother or humiliate my brother. What I wanted was acknowledgement. I wanted the truth to be on the table, visible, undeniable, so that nobody could rewrite history and make me the villain. And I was starting to see how that might happen. I talked to Sloan about it that night. She listened, asked her usual razor-sharp questions, and then said, "You know what's going to happen, right? Your mom is going to run out of options, and she's going to come back to you. When she does, you need to know exactly what you want." She was right. So I made a list. Not on paper, just in my head. What would it take for me to re-engage with my family in any capacity? First, I wanted a genuine acknowledgement of what I'd contributed. Not a vague "Craig helped out." A real, specific recognition that I had funded her life for 4 years. Second, I wanted the will revised. Not to cut Garrett out. I'm not that guy, but equal. 50-50. Because that's what fair looks like. Third, and this was the big one, I wanted Mom to tell the family the truth. No more letting everyone think Garrett was the one helping with bills. No more painting me as the ungrateful son who abandoned her. I didn't know if any of that would happen, but I knew that if it didn't, I was at peace with walking away. And that peace, that genuine willingness to let go, was the strongest position I'd ever been in. A few weeks later, Aunt Della called me again. She was careful about it, almost diplomatic. She said, "Craig, I know you don't want to hear about your mother, but I think there's something you should know." Mom had called a family meeting. Not a dinner, but a proper sit-down at Della's house. She'd invited Garrett, Della, my uncle Herschel, cousin Tatum, and a few other relatives. She'd intended it to be an intervention about me, about my abandonment. She wanted the family to collectively pressure me into resuming payments. But here's where it gets interesting. Della had apparently done some quiet investigating after our phone call. She'd talked to a few family members, asked some pointed questions, and she discovered that Mom's narrative had more holes than a screen door. Multiple relatives had been told that Garrett was the one handling Mom's finances. Della's husband Herschel had even lent Mom $2,000 a year ago because Mom told him she was strapped and the boys were doing their best, but it wasn't enough. The boys, plural, as if Garrett had contributed a single cent. So when Mom convened her intervention, Della came prepared. And instead of an ambush on Craig, it turned into an uncomfortable reckoning for Jolene. Della told me the highlights. Mom opened with her usual tearful performance about how I'd cut her off and left her to fend for herself. She was mid-sentence when Della interrupted and asked a simple question. "Jolene, how much money has Craig given you over the past 4 years?" Mom stammered. She said she didn't have exact numbers. Della pushed. "Ballpark. 10,000. 20. Mom said, "I don't know. Maybe 10 or 15,000. Della said, "Craig told me it was closer to 68,000. Is he lying?" The room went silent. Tatum, who had been firmly on Team Jolene up to that point, looked at Mom and said, "Wait, what?" Mom tried to redirect. She said the amount didn't matter, that what mattered was that a son doesn't abandon his mother. But the damage was done. Herschel, who is not a man of many words, looked at Mom and said, "You told me the boys were splitting things. You told me Garrett was helping." Mom didn't have an answer for that. Garrett, to his credit, or maybe to his shame, didn't try to lie. When Della asked him directly how much he'd contributed over 4 years, he stared at the floor and said, "Not enough." which was the understatement of the century, but at least it was honest. The meeting apparently devolved from there. Mom cried. Garrett looked sick. Tatum was furious, not at me, but at the deception. And Della, bless that woman, sat there calmly and said, Jolene, Craig isn't the one who needs an intervention. You are. I got the full recap from Della the next day. She didn't editorialize. She just laid out the facts and let me process. I sat with it for a while, and I felt something I didn't expect. I felt sad. Not for me. For my mother. Because she'd had 2 sons who could have been a team, who could have supported her together, and she'd blown it. She'd created a system where one son was rewarded for doing nothing and the other was exploited for doing everything. And now the system was collapsing, and she was standing in the rubble wondering why. 2 days after the family meeting, Garrett called me again. This time he didn't open with excuses. He said, Craig, I owe you an apology. A real one. Not the kind where I say sorry and then explain why it wasn't my fault. Just sorry. I didn't respond right away. I let the silence breathe. I knew, he said. I knew you were paying for everything. I knew, and I let it happen because it was easier for me. And when Mom told me about the will, I should have said something. I should have told her it wasn't fair. But I didn't, because I'm selfish. I've always been selfish. And I'm just now starting to see how much that cost you. I'm not going to pretend that one phone call fixed everything. It didn't. But it cracked something open. A door I thought was sealed shut. What do you want to do about it? I asked. I want to fix it. I don't know how, but I want to try. Then let's start with Mom. Because this doesn't work unless she sees it too. Garrett agreed. And for the first time in our entire lives, my brother and I were actually on the same page. Garrett and I met for coffee the following Saturday. Just the 2 of us. No girlfriends, no family buffer. We sat in a corner booth at a little place near my office. And for the first time in probably a decade, we actually talked. Not surface level stuff. Real talk. He told me things I'd never heard before. He said he'd always known Mom favored him and that it had messed him up in ways he was just starting to understand. He said being the golden child sounds great until you realize it comes with this unspoken expectation that you'll never actually have to prove anything, which means you never actually grow. He said he'd spent his adult life bouncing from thing to thing because nobody ever made him stick with anything, and every time he failed, Mom was there to tell him he was still amazing. You got the opposite deal, he said. You got ignored, and it made you build something real. I got praised, and it made me build nothing. I won't lie, that was a gut punch. Because he was right. The guy who could charm a room was sitting across from me with no charm at all, just raw truth. And it was the most real version of my brother I'd ever seen. We talked about what to do with Mom. Garrett said he'd been thinking about it, and he wanted to go to her together. Not to ambush her, not to lecture her, but to lay it all out. He said he'd tell her he wanted the will changed. Equal split, everything down the middle. He said if she refused, he'd decline the inheritance entirely. I asked if he meant that. He looked me in the eye and said, Craig, you spent $68,000 on our mother, and she gave you a Hallmark card. The least I can do is make sure the will isn't another slap in the face. We set it up for the following weekend. Della offered to be there as a neutral party, which I appreciated. Sloan offered to come, but I told her this was something I needed to do with just family. She understood. She kissed me on the forehead before I left and said, Remember who you are now. Don't let her pull you back into who you were. We drove to Mom's house on a Sunday afternoon. The place looked rougher than I remembered. Overgrown flower beds, gutters sagging, unopened mail stacked on the porch. Without my support, things had slid. I reminded myself this was the consequence of her choice, not mine. Mom opened the door and looked surprised to see both of us. She hugged Garrett immediately, the full embrace. She looked at me and said, Craig, like she was acknowledging a delivery driver. We sat in the living room. Della was already there with 2 cups of tea and that calm, measured expression she gets when she's prepared to referee. Mom sat in her recliner, the one Dad used to sit in, and crossed her arms. Defensive before anyone had said a word. Garrett spoke first, which surprised me. He started by telling Mom that he loved her, that he'd always love her, and that what he was about to say came from that love. Then he said, Mom, the will isn't fair, and I think you know it's not fair. Mom's jaw tightened. I explained my reasoning. Craig is stable. He doesn't need the money. Mom, Garrett said, Craig spent almost $70,000 keeping your life running. He paid your bills, fixed your house, co-signed your car, and you gave him nothing, not even a real thank you. I gave him my blessing. Della leaned forward. Jolene, blessings don't pay electric bills. You know that. Mom looked at me, and for the first time, there wasn't frustration or entitlement in her eyes. There was something else. Fear, maybe. The fear of someone who's realizing the story they've been telling themselves doesn't hold up under scrutiny. I spoke carefully. Mom, I didn't stop paying your bills to punish you. I stopped because you showed me, very clearly, what you think I'm worth. And I believed you. So I treated myself accordingly. I stopped undervaluing myself the way you've been undervaluing me my entire life. She started to cry, but this time it didn't feel performative. It felt real. The kind of crying that comes from a crack in something you've been keeping sealed for a long time. I didn't mean it like that, she said. Then what did you mean, Mom? Because from where I was sitting, it felt like you were telling me that Garrett's dreams matter and mine don't. That his future is worth investing in and mine isn't. That I'm the reliable one, so I don't need to be appreciated. She didn't answer right away. She sat in Dad's chair and cried, and Della handed her a tissue, and the room was quiet in a way that felt necessary. Like something needed to drain before anything could be rebuilt. Finally, she looked at me and said, I'm sorry, Craig. 3 words, and I could tell they cost her everything. My mother is not a woman who apologizes. She redirects, she deflects, she reframes. But this time, there was nowhere to go. The truth was in the room, and everyone had seen it. I took you for granted, she said. I told myself you didn't need me to worry about you because you always figured things out. But that wasn't fair. You figured things out because you had to, because nobody was figuring them out for you. And I should have seen that. I should have seen you. I nodded. I didn't trust myself to speak for a second because there was a lump in my throat the size of a baseball. Sloane wasn't there, but I could hear her voice in my head saying, it's okay to feel this. Garrett put his hand on Mom's arm and said, Mom, I want you to change the will. 50-50. The house, the money, everything. Equal. Mom looked at him like he'd suggested they sell the house and move into a tent. Garrett, that money was for your future. My future is my responsibility, just like Craig's been handling his. It's time I handled mine. She looked between us. I could see the gears turning. The old narrative, the one where Garrett was the dreamer who needed protecting and Craig was the dependable machine who didn't need fuel, was crumbling in real time. And underneath it was a mother who had made a terrible mistake and was only now understanding the cost. I'll call the lawyer, she said quietly. I'll change it. Equal. I exhaled. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath. Della smiled. Not a big, triumphant smile. Just a small, warm one. The kind that says, we got where we needed to go. We stayed for another hour. Mom told me she'd never fully dealt with losing Dad, and that she thinks she latched onto Garrett because he reminded her of him. The charm, the ease. She said she looked at me and saw herself. Quiet, hardworking, invisible. And instead of identifying with that and lifting me up, she'd looked away because it was too much like a mirror. That doesn't excuse it, but it explained it. And sometimes understanding is the first step towards something better. The will was changed the following month. 50-50, right down the middle. Mom also wrote me a letter. A real one, handwritten, for pages long. She apologized for every specific thing she could remember. The cross-country meets she missed. The achievements she glossed over. The years of financial support she never acknowledged. She said she didn't expect forgiveness immediately, but she wanted me to know that she saw me now. For real. I keep that letter in the drawer of my nightstand. I've read it maybe a dozen times. Garrett started paying Mom's bills. Not all of them, but he set up a monthly contribution and stuck with it. He also got a stable job as a sales manager at a building supply company. Not glamorous, but steady. He told me it was the first job where he felt like he was earning something instead of just performing. As for me, I got the promotion. Senior systems architect. Sloane and I got engaged 3 months later. Boyd cried at the proposal dinner, which was hilarious because the man is built like a refrigerator. Mom came to the engagement party. She brought a gift, a framed photo of me and Dad from when I was about 8, standing on the back deck he built, both of us grinning. On the back she'd written, he would be so proud of you. I am too. I didn't cancel my mother. I canceled a dynamic. The dynamic where I gave everything and received nothing, where my value was measured by my usefulness and my brother's value was measured by his potential. That dynamic is dead. What replaced it isn't perfect. Mom and I are still rebuilding. Garrett and I are closer than we've ever been. It's messy, real, human. But I'm not invisible anymore. I'm not the water heater. I'm Craig. I'm 34. I'm engaged to the best woman I've ever met. I've got a career I'm proud of, and I've got a family that's finally learning to see me. And yeah, I've still got my mother's blessing and prayers. Turns out when they come with actual respect, they're not such a bad inheritance after all.